Now, in regards to refugiums, we've got a bit of keto here, which is a good thing. It's good to give that a bit of a ruffle every now and then, so it doesn't get stagnant. Now, this tank now has Marine Pure. Now, Marine Pure is the best way of getting what's called parallel denitrification, because they've done heaps of research to work out the perfect surface area to volume ratio in order to grow parallel denitrifying bacteria. Now, back in the old days, before Marine Pure was invented, we used to use sand. And there was various people doing a whole lot of research, including Goman and a bunch of other people, that what they do is work out if you use a certain grain size of sand, and if you had a certain thickness of sand, and a lot of the time being on a plenum, so you'd have a little elevated section off the bottom, so the oxygen could exchange within the bottom to create a consistent oxygen level. Now, as far as the sand was concerned, these are often called deep sand beds. If you got the grain size and the thickness right, then you could create denitrification. If too much sediment got into the sand, which happens over time, and the sand's not something you can easily pull out and clean. So with the Marine Pure, if it clogs up, you just pull the block out, clean it, and put it back in again. It's just a very small job. With the sand, if you clean it, you've completely disturbed all of the parallel denitrification, which will then take 3 months to re-establish, and it's a very big job to clean it. And it's also risky because you can discharge what's called hydrogen sulfide out of your sand, which can kill your fish. So I would definitely not use sand. I would definitely use Marine Pure. And back in the days before Marine Pure, I did use sand. But now that we've got Marine Pure and we can have parallel denitrification without hydrogen sulfide, that's the way you go. The other way, you're risking it. And then also, a lot of people would set up these setups, and then they wouldn't get the grain size right, they wouldn't get the thickness right, the water flow or whatever, and it didn't work anyway. So I am not a fan of sand. I am a fan of Marine Pure. Now, a lot of people will use keto, and they'll put a light over the top, and this is a perfect situation here. Now, if you did have a bit more water flow in here and had the keto rolling around, that will help to stop it from going stagnant. Now, what you don't want with this keto is for it to just turn into a big ball of stagnation. Now, the reason why you don't want a big ball of stagnation is exactly the same as when you agitate your sand, because if you've got a thick layer of sand, what happens is you form nitrifying bacteria, and then you form denitrifying bacteria, and then you can get bad bacteria growing within anoxic zones where there's no oxygen, and that can discharge hydrogen sulfide, which is poisonous. So if you disturb your sand and release your hydrogen sulfide, that's a bad thing. Or if you have a big ball of keto and in the center is potentially hydrogen sulfide and you disturb it, that's a bad thing. You can kill your fish. So that's why people that use keto will often put a pump or something in here and just have the keto rolling around, because if it is rolling around, then it assumably isn't going to clog up. And then if you're not going to do that, what I'd probably do is just give it a bit of a stir every now and then. If every time you're mucking around with your skimmer, you gave your keto a bit of a stir, that means that you're not going to get hydrogen sulfide build up on the center of it. So there is a very, very, very small chance that if you disturb that keto, if it hasn't been disturbed for a long time, that you could kill your fish. Now, polyfilter is the best way of getting rid of hydrogen sulfide. So if you did that at the same time as you put a brand new fresh polyfilter on, I would be very confident to say that you'd be totally fine. But if you disturb that and you did not have fresh polyfilter, then there is a small risk that your fish would die. And I would also give your pump a bit of a clean too, a couple of times a year. So you pull the impeller out, give it a good clean. So that goes with the skimmer, that goes with the pump, and then any wave makers, just to make sure that they're running optimally. The other thing with keto is over time, if you notice it going a little bit yellow, or if you notice it not doing so well, you may want to start dosing iron. So with this dosing pump, we've already suggested you could get an extra dosing pump. And if you got an iron supplement on this dosing pump, then you would be able to dose a very small amount of iron in the event that that stops going green. You could also put like your Reef Energy products on the dosing pump so they don't need to be dosed. But mind you, nutrient-based coral food wouldn't be an issue for this tank because there's so many fish. But a trace element supplement would not be a bad thing. But he does a lot of water changes at the moment, so trace elements are not actually very important when you're doing a lot of water changes. But if you're not doing a lot of water changes, trace elements become very important. So once he gets that extra dosing pump, he could consider dosing iron. Iron also helps to bond with phosphate and drop that as a solution, and helps to grow the keto. Do not overdose it, otherwise you'll end up with too much algae. You could also consider vitamin trace element supplements, especially if he starts reducing the water changes because he's starting to dose the no-pox, then trace elements may be something you want to look at. Do not overdose them. And in order to check your trace element regime, you do want to send away an ICP test to get a guide of that. But with a tank like this, with lots and lots of fish, your nutrient coral foods are not very important. So you'd want to go pretty easy on your coral foods because there's a lot of fish in the tank, because your nutrients will also come from the fish. So the other thing we want to look at with this tank is I do want to start looking at why it's not getting a lot of coralline algae, because I really want these rocks to be much more purple than they are. So I'll just do a bit of a check on the magnesium, because we would like to see a bit more coralline in this tank. pH in this tank is about 8.2, which I'm very happy with. I would prefer it more like 8.4, but I'm definitely very happy with 8.2. Now, if you're going to go for electronic monitoring of any description, you must have realistic expectations. A lot of people will buy these fancy monitoring systems. They set them up and then they forget about them. Now, no electronic monitoring is set or forget. Just because you've got a nice digital readout or you've got a nice graph on an app, that does not mean that it is accurate. The probes need to be regularly cleaned correctly. They need to be calibrated regularly correctly. And they need to be cross-checked regularly correctly in order to be accurate. You cannot think that you're going to set up any of these systems and have them make your life easier. If you're a tech guy and you love reading manuals and you love fancy stuff and understanding the tech, go for it, get them. But if you're an average dude that thinks you're going to get a better result than old school, then just think again. Because if you're not going to get your head around exactly how it works, if you're not going to maintain it correctly, you may as well just do your good old tests, because you will end up becoming too reliant on your digital readout, and then you will think that everything's okay when you're just getting misguided tests. So in the end, old school everything just seems to be the best. There's so many fancy pumps these days, super low efficiency with app conductivity, connectivity and stuff, and they fail. The more fancy your equipment, the more your system can fail. In the old days, we would sell an Eheim pump and it would still be there in 15 or 20 years. The less that can go wrong, the less that will go wrong. Now, I just checked the KH level and it was 10, which I'm happy with. I prefer 8, but I'm very happy with 10. That means that enough KH has been going in the water. And the pH was 8.2, which I'm also very happy with. But because the KH was high and the pH was a little bit low, that made me then decide to check the oxygen. Now, oxygen must be tested at the source. So you can't take a water sample to get an oxygen test. You have to test it where it is. Now, this oxygen I'm going to suggest is about 2. Now, oxygen is an absolute snapshot. So the photosynthesis will increase the oxygen, and having lots and lots of fish, such as this tank, that's going to make the oxygen go down. And you're going to have heaps of bacteria in the filter, and that's going to make the oxygen go down. Then you've got Keto, which during the day will help to make the oxygen go up, but that looks pretty stagnant, that Keto. I think that needs a bit of work, which we're going to do, and that's going to make the oxygen go up in the day and down during the night because of photosynthesis. So what I would like to see done on this tank is a good clean of all the biological media. So hopefully that will make it more efficient. When you're doing gravel cleans, you're doing a gravel clean every water change, aren't you? So I'm going to assume the gravel's pretty clean. So the thing that I'm going to want to do now is you've got some power heads, and they're actually sort of aiming down. They are cross-streaming, so we are getting some surface agitation. But what I sort of want to do is just angle these up a little bit, just by moving this. So I want to see the surface get broken more. So let me just figure out what...
You need 2 hands.
Yeah, I need 2 hands. But so basically, if we just tilt this back, actually we've just got to... Yeah, I'll need 2 hands. But if we just tilt that back and we make this surface break more. So these ones are pretty much aiming down. If I could just tilt them that way a little bit, just so the surface breaks, because you're getting good flow on the surface, but not a lot of breaking. And then also we want to... Oh, is that filterable down in there? In the sump, in the weir, is there filterable down there? Yeah, it looks like there is. Oh no, there's not. There's not filterable at all. Okay, so having the water falling off down there is going to help a little bit. But we don't want that to be noisy, but that's okay. So we just need to work out how to agitate the surface of the tank a little bit more. And we need to work out how to make the sump agitate a little bit more. So whether we put an air stone in the sump, that would probably be enough, or an extra little power head in the sump just to turn the Keto around and to agitate the surface. So it's all just a little bit flat, a bit flat, bit flat, bit flat, because of how many fish. So I would like the oxygen level up in this tank. So cleaning the filter material. And the other thing that's going to help too is, if this is all quite enclosed, so in the door at the front of here and here, if we could put a couple of grates in here, that would really help. And even you could get real fancy and potentially even put like a little fan or something in the grates that are in the top. So exchanging oxygen in the unit is going to help the oxygen level. And the other thing is, depends on how closed up the house is. If this is a room that's often closed up, it will have lower oxygen levels. If you have gas heating, you'll have lower oxygen levels. So this tank here, due to the amount of fish and due to the limited amount of surface agitation, the oxygen is just a little bit on the low side. But you really don't want to freak out over one oxygen test, because from morning to night, you will get changes in oxygen level, and giving it a good clean would help. Oxygen is something that is really quite variable. So getting a few oxygen readings before you freak out would be a good thing. But increasing surface agitation and giving your pre-filters a bit of a clean, and potentially keeping the room as open as possible, being wary of gas heaters, and putting vents on the doors. And another thing that's really, really good is just go to Bunnings and get a good old clip-on fan, and then blow that over the sump and or the tank is another great way of increasing your oxygen. But you need to look at oxygen exchange of the water to the air, and you also need to look at oxygen exchange from the inside of the cabinet to the outside of the cabinet. So if you can just be aware of that and raise your oxygen a little bit, and you could consider taking the lids off. They're not tight sealing lids by the looks of it, so I don't really think the lids are the problem. But I'm looking at oxygen exchange. It's also going to help algae too, because the CO2 level may be increased by the decrease of oxygen. Not necessarily related though. Just a consideration.